On 9th April 1241, on the field by the village of Legnica, good field, which today looks completely peaceful, several thousand European knights face an almost equal, but very differently organized army of the Mongol Empire. By evening, Duke Henry the Pious lies headless, his army is almost wiped out, and Mongol horsemen, according to the chroniclers, stuff sacks with the ears of the fallen to count the kill. By the end of this story, you'll see how, on one muddy field, Europe's faith in knightly honor and heavy armor dies. Picture this. You're a Silesian knight under the banners with the black piast eagle. On your right are knights from Greater Poland. On your left, the men of Duke Mieszko. Ahead of you, town militias and even miners from Złotoria with spears. And in the center, a few dozen grim Templars and Teutonic knights in white cloaks. The Pope promises an indulgence. The priests tell you that you are the wall standing against the Tatar Antichrist. Somewhere nearby, the Czech king Wenceslaus is supposed to appear with a large army, and then together you'll drive the enemy back. On paper, this is the opening act of a crusading triumph. The reality at Legnica will be very different. The main paradox of Legnica is that it isn't the battle that saved Europe, as patriotic articles like to claim. It's a perfect demonstration performance by the Mongol war machine. A relatively small corps under Baidar and Kadan isn't trying to conquer Poland forever. Its job is to cut the possible link-up of Polish, Czech, and Hungarian forces, while Subutai and Batu prepare the main blow in Hungary. For them, Legnica is a big raid and an operational trick. For Europe, it's a shock that will force people to rethink what war means in the 13th century. Pull the camera back. 2 years before Legnica, the Mongols smash a string of Russian principalities and in December 1240 take Kiev. In the spring of 1241, the western arm of their invasion splits. The main force goes into Hungary, one column pushes through Transylvania, and Baidar's corps rides into Poland. Between January and March, they move through Lublin and Zawichost, crush local levies at Tursko and Chmielnik, take Sandomierz, and burn an almost empty Krakow. The Polish dukes try to raise troops but act separately and slowly, a perfect target for a nomad army that lives on speed and surprise. At this moment, Poland isn't a single kingdom, but a mosaic of duchies. Henry II the Pious, Duke of Wrocław and Krakow, dreams of getting the crown back and becoming the gatherer of the lands. His domains are rich and densely populated, so the role of organizer of the defense falls on him. He pulls in Silesian knights, retinues from Greater and Lesser Poland, mercenaries, and a small number of crusading knights from the orders. Czech King Wenceslaus II promises to bring his army, but advances slowly and carefully. Opposing them is a Mongol corps under unified command, not burdened by diets, councils of barons, or local political games. By early April, Baidar bypasses fortified Wrocław, wasting no time on a siege, and moves toward Legnica. This is already the final act of the Polish campaign. Behind him lie burned-out towns. Ahead lies the objective of breaking through to Moravia and then to Hungary, where the whole Mongol machine is converging. But in the minds of people at the time, it looks very different. The Tatars stand almost at the borders of the Holy Roman Empire. Rumors travel as far as the Rhine. The Pope and emperors receive panicked letters. Legnica becomes a symbolic frontier, even though for the Mongol commanders it's just another step in the plan. Now let's look at the overpowered unit of the 13th century through the eyes of a steppe commander. His army is almost entirely cavalry, light horse archers with powerful composite bows, trained to shoot at full gallop, and heavy cavalry for the decisive charge. Each rider carries several bows, multiple quivers, spare horses. Discipline is iron. Punishment for freelancing is brutal. They have scouts, screens, a signaling system with flags and smoke. The main Mongol weapon isn't just the bow, it's operational thinking. They don't think of a single charge, but of an entire campaign sprawling over thousands of kilometers. The Europeans come to the field with a different set of habits. Their infantry is town militia, and levies armed with whatever they could get. The core of their strength is the knightly heavy cavalry. Armor is expensive, horses are big. The lance charge is supposed to break the enemy's line and decide the battle in 1 or 2 impacts. That's how they were taught. That's how it worked against neighboring feudal lords. Henry's army does have elite formations: Templars, Teutonic Knights, possibly Hospitallers, but each contingent is used to fighting its own way. Anything like Mongol-style coordination is simply absent. This is a patchwork of coats of arms, not a single organism. The numbers on each side are their own little puzzle. Medieval sources love throwing around tens of thousands. Modern researchers, comparing logistics and demographics, cautiously speak of roughly 3,000 to 8,000 Mongol horsemen, and maybe a comparable or slightly larger number under Henry, including militia. Either way, this isn't a handful of heroes against a horde of 100,000. It's a fight between 2 relatively small armies. One professional, mobile, and tightly commanded. The other heavy, motley, and convinced that noble blood can make up for the lack of scouting. The meeting place is picked by the Mongols. The field of Legnica is open ground to the southeast of the town, with gentle hills and shallow depressions. Sources argue about the exact spot, but agree it was good terrain for maneuvering cavalry. The ship of history is already turning. Baidar's corps takes the advantageous positions, leaving Henry the role of the side that has to react. Only a single day's march separates him from Wenceslaus the Fair, but in a world where armies move at walking speed, one day can be a gulf. The Czech army remains a ghost force somewhere beyond the horizon. On the morning of 9th of April, Henry forms his army into 4 banners, 4 battle groups. The first is the vanguard of knights and lightly armed troops, including the famous spear-bearing miners. The second and third are heavy cavalry under Mieszko II, the Fat, and the Krakow voivode Sulisław. The fourth, the reserve, is under Henry's own command, with his best knights and the contingent from the orders. The Mongols, according to the chronicles, line up their heavy cavalry in the center and place light horse archers on the flanks, ready to unleash a storm of arrows and feign flight on signal. It's a chessboard where one player knows all the openings and the other is betting on a massive queen sacrifice. Psychologically, the field is already charged. The Europeans have seen burned towns, refugees, and heard tales of Tatars who know no mercy. Papal letters call them the scourge of God, but the priests on site explain it differently. If this is God's scourge, then God expects a heroic stand from you. The Mongols, for their part, are used to European knights sprinting forward in frontal attacks and plan for exactly that. Some accounts say Mongol envoys offer Henry terms of surrender before the battle, but after Mongol envoys were executed in Hungary, no one is in the mood for negotiations. 2 systems of values collide. One believes in miracles, the other in a well-rehearsed script. The first act of the slaughter starts at range. The Mongols push forward their light cavalry. A rain of arrows lands in front of the Polish lines, then over them. Some sources claim the nomads use smoke, or even poisonous mixtures of burning herbs and sulfur to obscure vision and weaken men and horses. Modern historians are cautious about that, but one fact is clear: the battlefield fills with smoke and dust. For Mongol riders, this is a familiar environment. For the Europeans, it's almost blindness. Henry has no intention of standing still under fire. He throws his forward banner into the attack. Knights and spearmen, hunched behind their shields, push through the smoke and genuinely drive back the Mongol vanguard. Several hundred steppe warriors fall back. Some, maybe, go down under the lances. In the European camp, this feels like confirmation of the old recipe. Hit bravely enough, and the Tatars can't hold. Men in the first ranks see the enemy's backs and hear the order: run them down. In reality, they've just taken the bait. The trick the Mongols play next is one they've practiced for decades. The light cavalry stages a panicked rout, all the while snapping back with arrows. The pursuing knights speed up, their formations stretch out, infantry hopelessly falls behind. At some point, Mongol units begin to peel off towards the flanks, weaving and pelting the pursuers' sides with arrows. At this moment, the heavy steppe cavalry still waits off to the side. They're watching for the moment when the prey is finally bogged down in a chaotic chase. Europe has seen this tactic in Russia, but at Legnica it prefers to treat it as just cowardly tales from losers. Then the human factor kicks in. In one of the most famous accounts, Mongol horsemen begin shouting in Polish, "Run! Run!" words they could have learned from local guides or prisoners. In the thick smoke, it sounds like an order to retreat. Duke Mieszko II, seeing some of the leading banners vanish into the haze and hearing the shouting, allegedly decides that the battle is lost and pulls his banner off the field. The withdrawal quickly turns into a rout, dragging other units with it. The front collapses. Modern historians argue over the details, but the chronicles agree on one thing. One flank of the European army kicks the ground out from under its own feet. At this point, you can clearly see how differently the two armies are run. In the Mongol host, any mid-level commander knows exactly what arc he's supposed to ride, when to close the ring, how to react to each signal. In Henry's army, every duke and every orders master acts at his own discretion, and communications mean a messenger on horseback who simply can't find his recipient in the smoke and chaos. Henry sees the line falling apart, but he has neither the time nor the tools to pull it back together. Unlike the Mongol machine, his army runs not on orders but on personal initiative. And in a panic, initiative always works against the commander. Now the Mongols hit the throttle. The heavy cavalry that has been holding back goes in. Light horsemen on the flanks keep shooting, turning the space between them and the Europeans into a corridor of death. The leading banners of knights find themselves cut off from the reserve. The Templars and Teutonic knights, according to some sources, try to form a tight square around their banner and fight hand to hand, but cavalry surrounds them and buries them in arrows. Somewhere in the middle of the field stands a dense mass of infantry and militia, into which scattered groups of knights and Mongol wedges crash from above. This isn't a line of battle, it's chaos. And in chaos, the side with a plan wins. Henry throws his reserve into the fight, trying to save the day with his own charge. As a proper feudal lord, he rides in the front ranks under his personal standard. For a moment it looks like the heavy mass of his knights is breaking through the Mongol ring. Chroniclers love these almost victory moments. But the tight encirclement, exhaustion, and arrows dropping horses under the riders all work against them. At some point, Henry falls from his horse and dies. His body is lost in the heap. Later, the chroniclers say, they identify him by a strange detail. One of his feet has 6 toes. The duke's head ends up on a lance and is carried to the walls of Legnica, a silent argument about who owns this field now. After the hell on the field comes ritual arithmetic. According to Russian and Polish sources, Mongol warriors cut 1 ear from each fallen enemy and pile them into sacks. They speak of 9 large sacks stuffed with human ears. This isn't accounting in the modern sense, it's a symbolic report to the Khan. We'll never know the exact number of dead. The chronicles scream about the near total destruction of Henry's army. Modern estimates are more careful but agree on one point. The Polish-German host loses the lion's share of its men, and the region's knightly elite takes a brutal hit. The Mongols also suffer casualties, but keep the core fully combat-capable. The battlefield after Legnica is not a heroic engraving, but a filthy warehouse of corpses. Heavy armor won't even let the fallen die beautifully. Bodies are twisted, horses lie in heaps with men, and crows and vultures already circle over the field. In the coming days, the main problem for local monasteries and towns isn't prayer, but burial. They have to get the bodies underground before disease starts. Against this backdrop, stories of heroic resistance to the last night look like an attempt to give meaning to what was, in practice, a very utilitarian slaughter. And here's the crucial point. After such a victory, the Mongols do not march further west. Instead of riding on to the rich German cities, within a couple of weeks they move toward Otmuchov, then turn south through Moravia, ravaging Czech and Slovak towns along the way, until they finally link up with the main army in Hungary. This isn't a miraculous salvation of Europe. It's the execution of the original plan. The Polish campaign was a diversion from the start, not the main objective. But for local chroniclers, the very fact that the Mongols turn away after such a victory feels almost supernatural, and later it easily becomes the myth. We stopped the horde with our blood. Henry II's death changes Poland's internal map. The man who could have become king and the center of reunification lies headless. His heirs are weak, and neighbors eagerly exploit the situation. Feudal fragmentation drags on for centuries more. Silesia gradually slides into the orbit first of the Czech crown and then of German politics. Legnica becomes not the shield of Europe, but a symbol of failure. A country that didn't manage to unite tries to solve a decades-long problem with one heroic charge instead of building alliances, fortresses, and a shared command structure. On a wider scale, Legnica is just one shot in the salvo of 1241. 2 days later, the Mongols smash the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi, delivering a blow far more massive in troop numbers and consequences. If there's a place where the backbone of medieval Central Europe really cracks, it's there. But it's Legnica that becomes, in the Western imagination, the place where the Eastern locust first collided with the knightly West. It's convenient. You can talk about a heroic defeat without mentioning that the main catastrophe happened further south. Over the centuries, a thick layer of myth grows around the battle. In Polish tradition, Legnica is often presented as a sacrifice that stopped the Mongols, although we know their withdrawal is tied primarily to the empire's internal politics and the death of the Great Khan, which forces them to call a Kurultai. In German and Czech texts of the 19th century, forged heroic chronicles even appear, claiming a great Mongol defeat near Olomouc, a pretty story later exposed by historians as a literary hoax. Modern historiography in the 20th and 21st centuries takes this construction of myths apart piece by piece, but popular imagination still prefers simple plots. So what does Legnica give us in terms of military evolution? It shows Europeans, in a very concrete way, that heavy cavalry without missile support, without coordination with infantry, and without proper scouting turns from a tank into a very expensive target. The Mongols demonstrate the value of mobility, feigned retreats, massed fire at range, and, above all, centralized command. In the following centuries, European armies slowly increase the share of infantry, crossbowmen, and later gunners. The role of staffs and campaign planning grows, instead of relying purely on individual, glorious clashes. Legnica is one of the first loud warning bells in that process. And finally, the philosophical punchline. On the field of Legnica, two faiths collide. Henry's faith that piety and a knightly charge can replace a system, and the Mongol commander's faith that the system matters more than individual bravery. Europe loses not because its men are more cowardly or weaker, but because each of them fights on his own, under his own coat of arms, with his own logic, with his own panic. The Mongols count ears, the Europeans count the coats of arms of dead lineages. The flock of crows that settles on the field of Legnica by evening doesn't distinguish between them. For those birds, all this armor, all these oaths and hymns are just one more feast served up by pride that failed to keep pace with its own century.